we are going to start the first lecture after mid-sem in the afternoon session. So myself, Professor Shubhradip Ghosh from Department of Physics, IIT Guwahati, will be teaching you one half of this part, that is post mid-sem, and I will be covering special theory of relativity in next 7 lectures. Now I could see that in the message box there have been lots of queries, including what is STR, whether it is required, whether the previous knowledge of classical mechanics, that is what you studied in the first half of the class, whether that is required or not, and then the other technical details like whether PDF will be provided, whether lecture slides will be provided, whether recording will be done, and so on and so forth. So we will be following the exact same protocol that has been followed in the pre-mid-sem time. Okay, only the instructor has changed, but the mode of operation of the PH101 team has not changed. Okay, so I guess that answers all your queries that have been posted in the chat box by and large. So what is this special theory of relativity? As I was telling before this recording started, that is informally, that this special theory of relativity was basically Einstein's brainchild, but there is a history behind it, and it actually revolutionized the way we are habituated to see the classical world. That is the world that follows Newtonian mechanics, Newtonian ideas of classical physics. The special theory of relativity put a lot of them under a big challenge. And of course, the end result was no, Newtonian mechanics was not wrong, but there was a certain parts of the world that the Newtonian mechanics was unable to address. And for that, the necessary correction is what is called the special theory of relativity. So it's very much a part of mechanics. Not only that, the special theory of relativity went far beyond that. It took within its fold the other important development in physics. One of the pillars of the basic physics, like the classical physics, is the dynamics of electromagnetic field, which is known as electrodynamics, which you will study in somewhat detail in the next semester. So special theory of relativity actually addressed the issues which were kind of, acting against one another in case of mechanics and electrodynamics. So it basically resolved the dispute between them and formulated a much stronger theory which can sort of take into its fold the entire ideas of classical physics and the classical electrodynamics. That is what its strength is. So as we will be reading along, you will see that there are several new concepts which are often very counterintuitive. That is, it would be very difficult to imagine those concepts and sort of visualize and even internalize those concepts, right? So, but at the end, you will be, I hope that you will be able to discover the beauty of the subject and understand the necessity of it. So with this introduction, let me now start sharing my slides. Today, this first lecture would be, of course, introduction, but the introduction doesn't mean that just, sort of me talking, over a period of time, giving you a wider picture and so on and so forth. Today would be the first part of the historical development of what led to the subject of special theory of relativity. And the historical development is not that at this period of time, this guy did that or that guy did that. There will be, solid science into it, the logical uh, build up of the concepts, the anomalies that were discovered in classical physics, and the antagonism between classical physics and classical electromagnetism at that stage. All these, how step by step those were debated and those led to resolution through formulation of special theory of relativity. In the first lecture, we will cover a part of it. Okay. So, what have we learned so far? I mean, your class 2 and then the first part of this course was all Newtonian mechanics. And what goes into making Newtonian mechanics, or the core of the Newtonian mechanics? The Newton's three laws of motion. The first law talks about the state of inertia and uniform motion. The second law introduces the force. Although I have written this mathematical expression F equal to ma, this is not really the second law of motion. As you know, it is just a way to evaluate the force. Rather, it is the rate of change of momentum is equal to what we call as force. And the third one is the principle of action and reaction, okay, which basically tells you that under the Newtonian mechanics, uh, it is always at least two bodies that are in action. Okay, so the Newton's third law of motion really doesn't deal with one single body. So when we talk about action and reaction, it's always minimum two bodies, right? So basically, Newtonian mechanics acts in case of at least pairs of particles. Then from there, we derived very important laws, that conservation of momentum, and for rotational motion, conservation of angular momentum, and of course, energy conservation. So these are well known. And in the first part of this course, what you have done is you have learned new way techniques of doing the Newtonian mechanics. That you, instead of going the classical way of identifying the forces and then, write down the equation of motion through force balance and all that, what you did was an elegant formulation which was faster, which was cheaper. That is the Lagrangian mechanics. In terms of Lagrangian and Hamiltonian, you got the same sets of equations of motion. Okay, that was it. Now, of course, what you learned is not for waste. Of course, if somebody who was asking probably was asking whether the Lagrangian and Hamiltonian formulation will be useful for this part. Well, strictly speaking, no, but the concepts of Newtonian mechanics certainly will be used. So now, in the framework of Newtonian mechanics, the way it was developed, the way we know it got developed, the two things are not explicit. One is, what is the role of time? See, over here, the time has never been considered as anything important. Okay. Of course, we are studying dynamics, but it's just the time evolution of the other physical quantities. That time itself can be as important as the displacement or acceleration or velocity. That was never the case. That is not how Newtonian mechanics developed, or the philosophy of Newtonian mechanics was like that. And second is the concept of an observer. That is what we describe, the dynamics we describe, the state of the matter we describe. A role of an observer, or the person who is measuring something, the role is very important. These two things were not explicit. That means those were sort of kind of taken for granted, that their role is not as important as the other dynamical quantities that we deal with. Okay, has any one of you kept your microphone unmuted? Because there is a lot of noise I can hear, so I would request to mute yourself. Thank you. Okay. So now, before we delve into the details and show you why these two things I mentioned, which are not explicit in Newtonian mechanics, are important, let us give certain concepts when we talk about relativity or try to see the dynamics, the kinematics of systems in a new light. The concept is that of an event. Okay, what is an event? An event is just a physical phenomenon, okay, which happens independent of the state of the observer, right? And it can be anything. For example, collision of two particles, right? Movement of something, measurement of something, that is independent of the state of the observer, okay? So scientifically, or if you want to pin it, in a mathematician's way, that an event is something with which you can associate four coordinates, three space coordinates and one time coordinate. That is, it happens in a position in space and at an instant of time. Now, what differs is not the event, the happening of the event. What differs is the coordinates can vary from one observer to another. That is where the role of observer becomes very important. And see, here, along with the space coordinates, I have also included the time coordinate, which implicitly means that time is as important as the space coordinates. So far, in the Newtonian mechanics, that was not the case. The way we have learned, the way we have developed the subject, the way Newton has developed the subject, time was never at par with the space coordinates. Okay. So when we talk about the coordinates may vary from one observer to another, what does it mean? That if, excuse me, if somebody wants to say something. Okay. So when we say that we need to give a description and the coordinates may vary from one observer to another, that means we need to establish a reference frame in order to describe an event. That is, if I am giving the description of an event in terms of space and time coordinates, I have to tell with respect to which reference frame I am giving the description. Okay. Now, this concept of reference frame is known to you, I believe. Already you have done this, inertial and non-inertial frames. So the name reference frame already has popped up in your mind, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. But let's just recap quickly. What is a reference frame? Basically, now that we are talking about an event, an observer, and coordinate system and time, so a reference frame is described to an observer with a coordinate system and a clock. The coordinate system, because with respect to which you can give the spatial description, and a clock to give the time description. Of course, the reference frame could be moving, and the coordinate transformation may be time dependent. So here is a very sort of elementary kind of demonstration that we have two reference frame. One is denoted by S, another is denoted by S prime. This S prime is moving with respect to S with a velocity v along the x direction. Now you see that this S and S prime frames, their origin, I have fixed a coordinate system with them, two-dimensional coordinate system. The origin of the coordinate systems, they do not coincide with one another. So the origin, if I fix for S at 0, 0, the origin for S prime is at A, B. So as a result, here are the transformation equations. Suppose this black dot is a ball that is right there. If we want to find out the position coordinates of that ball, they are different as measured by observers in the two different reference frames. And these are the connecting equations. It is too easy to see. You can easily understand, right? Because after a time t, this S prime frame at the instant time t, if I am measuring, doing the measurement, then this reference frame has already moved a distance vt. Okay. So therefore, these are the connecting equations between the coordinates in the two reference frames. Okay. Now, what kind of reference frame is required to understand the Newtonian mechanics? That is called the inertial reference frame. What is an inertial reference frame? One in which the Newton's law of inertia is valid. And what is Newton's law of inertia? That is the first law, that unless a force is applied, an entity, a particle, a body does not not change its state of inertia. That is, if it is at rest, it will continue to be at rest, and if it is at a uniform motion, it will continue to be in that uniform motion. So over here, once again, I'm trying to demonstrate that suppose I have a particle here whose position is being described in two different frames. One is S and one is S prime. At R and R prime are the two vectors which describe the position of the particles respectively in S and S prime frames, and V is the velocity vector of S prime frame with respect to S. Okay. So if that is the case, then what is the connection? I mean, what are the kinetical quantities, physical quantities look like? So if S prime is moving with respect to S with velocity V, and in S frame, a particle is moving under influence of a force F. First of all, the coordinate transformations will read like simply R prime equal to R minus Vt. This is easy to see. Okay. See, over here, the S prime and S had coincided before we started our time. After a time t with a velocity v, this S prime has moved to over here. So as a result of that, the coordinates of the particle in the two frames are connected to this way. Now, if you simply take a derivative of this, then you can connect the velocity and acceleration of the particles. So velocity is once again frame dependent. You do not measure the same velocity in the two frames, okay? But interesting thing is the acceleration measured in two frames are the same, and it has serious consequences, okay? Am I clear up to this point?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, very good. Let's move ahead. Now, we talked about a force. Okay, let's come to the force now. Now, the force that was measured to be F in S frame, it is now F prime as measured in S prime frame. Question is F prime equal to F? So acceleration is same, are the forces measured to be same. Now, suppose if we take electrostatic force between two particles, two charged particles, both of Q charge, one is at a position R1, another is at a position R2. What is the force? This is the force expression that I have written. Of course, I have written in vector form, but if you simply take only the magnitude, it's Q square by R square kind of thing, R1 minus R2 whole square. Now, if I change the frame, this R1 and R2 will read as R1 prime minus R2 prime. But this R1 prime minus R2 prime, that is the distance between the two particles. I'm talking about a length. Distance between the two particles is the length of a line drawn between these two. Can that be different? Can that be frame dependent? Of course not. There is absolutely no concept of that. How can a length be different, dependent upon the observer or the frame? So R1 prime minus R2 prime would be equal to R1 minus R2. So when that is the case, then F prime will be equal to F. So yes, the force measured in S prime would be the same as the force measured in S. So force is completely independent of the reference frame. Now, if S is inertial, then of course we know that the second law of motion, Newton's second law of motion is ma equal to F. And now since A equal to A prime and F equal to F prime, then I would have an equation ma prime equal to F prime, this form. So now ma prime equal to F prime is a form of, which is a mathematical form of Newton's second law of motion, which is valid in S prime frame. So S prime also must be inertial. So this is what I meant to say, is that the frame S prime, which is moving with a constant velocity v with respect to another frame S, is also inertial. So inertial frames are those in where the Newton's laws are valid actually. Okay, Newton's three laws are valid. So those are the inertial frames. And for the rest of our course in STR, we will be explicitly focusing ourselves on the inertial frames only, because that is what special theory of relativity about. For the non-inertial frame, you have to generalize it, and that goes under the purview of general theory of relativity, which we are not going to consider here. Okay, so is it clear? Is it clear of what we just arrived at?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great, very good.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now here we made several implicit assumptions, and those assumptions are not crazy. Is that just what I said? That in the both the frames, both observers use the same scale of measurement. What does that mean? That if an observer in S measures the length of a rod, or let's say the distance between the two particles to be Ls, observer in S prime will also measure the same length. Of course, otherwise it would be very counterintuitive. I have a rod, no matter whether I am in a train or in a on a static platform. How can the length of the rod be different, right? And how do I measure the length? Is basically this is where the concept of event comes. So suppose instead of a rod, I have a fish which is swimming in water. I want to measure the length of this fish. What would I do? At the same instant of time, I will measure the position of the tail of the fish and the position of the front portion of the fish, front of the face, right? So with the same meter scale, I am going to sort of record my measurements simultaneously at the same time, and then this difference between these two will give me the length of the fish. Okay, the fish is actually moving with a velocity v. Okay, so this is very important that simultaneously we have to measure, because if I try to measure the tail of the fish at a time t and the head of the fish at a later time t, that doesn't make sense, because by that time this tail has actually moved. Okay, so therefore that's completely unreasonable. You have to do the measurement at the simultaneous. In fact, I'm asking you to mark my word, because this concept of simultaneity is very important in development of the subject special theory of relativity. The concept itself will challenge what we have learned so far. Okay. Now the other implicit assumptions are the time measured in both frames are same. As I said, we haven't really considered time at equal footing as the space coordinates. So time measured in both frames are same, and mass also remains invariant. Okay. These are the implicit assumptions based upon which we showed that if it is an inertial frame, no matter whether it's moving with respect to another one with a constant velocity, all the three Newton's laws are valid. Okay. Now, let us sort of put it in a more general way in a bunch of equations, the transformations between the coordinates and the time. That is called the Galilean transformation, because it was sort of worked out by Galileo. It is very simple. What we have been discussing so far, now I can put together in the following way. You see, once again, there are the two reference frame. One is S, another is S prime. Okay, and we have a point P we are interested in sort of its measuring its coordinates. So S prime is moving with respect to S with a constant velocity v along the x direction. So the coordinates of point P, the x coordinates of point P will only be different in the two different frames. Okay, so you can see that the set of equations, transformation equations, between the coordinates as measured in two frames, the only change is there in the x coordinate. The y and z, there is no change. There is no change in time. And since the motion is completely along the x direction, this is the relation between the velocities. In fact, this u prime equal to u minus v, this is already known to you, because you have solved umpteen number of problems of relative velocity. Boatman is rowing his boat in water, and the direction of the stream is the following. So what is the velocity of the boat with respect to the ground, and so on and so forth? Those kind of problems you have done, and you have actually used this equation, this velocity equation, without knowing that it is part of a development, a part of a much bigger thing, part of the Galilean transformation. Okay. All right. So what are the observations out of it? The observations are that time interval and space interval measurements are absolutes. That is same for all inertial observers. Second is results are independent of the relative velocity of the frames. That is, any v is possible. See, when we have given the description, we have not put any restriction on what value we can assume. It can be any v. Third is mass is independent of motion with respect to an observer. There is no mention of mass anywhere. And then acceleration is same in all inertial frames, that is Newton's laws of motions, and equations of motion of a particle would be exactly the same in all inertial frames. So by means of Galilean transformation, we could establish that the Newton's laws of motion are intact across all the inertial frames. Well, what are the important consequences is that this tells us that no mechanical experiments carried out entirely in one inertial frame can tell the observer what the motion of that frame is with respect to any other inertial frame. That means if you carry out an experiment, you cannot say that what is the motion of that frame with respect to any other inertial frame. Okay, so I give you a very simple example that suppose you are on a railway platform, standing there, and then a train passes by, your friend is sitting over there. Okay, and the train goes with a velocity. Okay, um, suppose 50 kilometer per hour. So what would you say? You would say, okay, my friend is moving with a velocity of 50 kilometer per hour, and you see in sort of 10 minutes time, he will be crossing this distance, or in 1 hour he will be crossing 50 kilometers. But then your friend will say, well, I haven't crossed any distance, because how do you measure that? Because I am sitting on this seat and I haven't moved. 1 hour, 10 minutes, 2 hours, doesn't matter. My position remains intact over here. So I haven't moved. But in the meantime, I cannot see you. But with some remote sensor, I can see your motion. You are actually moving. You have actually crossed 50 kilometers in 1 hour. Are you getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
So, therefore, there is no way at all by which you can determine the absolute velocity of an inertial frame from mechanical experiments. Both you and your friend are giving the correct statement, because that is your observation, right? Now, one is in a moving frame, another is in a quote unquote rest frame. The one on the platform looks like in a rest frame, but not with respect. But your friend on the train wouldn't agree. Your friend on the train would say that I am at rest because my position as per the coordinate system fixed on this train is the same. There is no displacement. So I am at rest. You on the platform or whatever you are standing on, it is actually moving, right? So both of them are right. Both of their observations, both of their experimentations are right. So no inertial frame is preferred over any other. All inertial frames are equivalent. So therefore, what we can speak of, we can only speak of relative velocity of one frame with respect to another one, and not an absolute velocity of a frame. So if we say that, okay, this frame is at rest, that means its velocity is 0, that concept or that statement has no meaning. Okay. So this idea of understanding things or understanding the nature in terms of the relative velocity of the frames is the purview of Newtonian or Galilean relativity, which is basically the prelude to the special theory of relativity. Okay. So this is the language of the relativity, that all inertial frames are equivalent. So there is no point saying, the velocity of this frame is this. When you say the velocity of the frame is this, then you have to also say with respect to which one. Right? So, I mean, you got this idea when you had worked out those, Boltzmann and the reverse stream kind of problems, but it was not explicit that you have to understand things in terms of the relative velocity of two different frames. Okay, so what it established is that there is no preference of one inertial frame over another. All are equivalent, and that is why the Newton's law is valid in all of them. Okay, got my point? All right.
Yes, sir.
So we could nicely fit in mechanics into Galilean relativity, but at the same time, but mechanics is not the only physics. In the 19th century, another very important discovery which made a revolution in the physical world was the laws of electrodynamics. So what is electrodynamics? I'm coming to that. So electrodynamics is the dynamics of electromagnetic field. Here, the kinematics that we study, or the classical mechanics that we studied, is dynamics of a mechanical field, mechanical forces. But there is a electromagnetic forces, the world of charged particles, their motion. You already know that there is something called a Lorentz force. Okay, for the static charged particles, there is Coulomb force. But for the moving charged particles, there is a magnetic field also, and there is something called a Lorentz force, right? Okay, so the force is different. And so electrodynamics is basically deals with the dynamics of the electromagnetic field. Now, just like the dynamics of a mechanical force field is described by Newton's laws of motion, this electrodynamics, or the dynamics of the electromagnetic field, is described by Maxwell's equations. So Maxwell, in latter part of the 19th century, he obtained 4 basic equations which connect the electric field and the magnetic field, the motion, charged particle in motion that will give rise to a magnetic field. Okay, and so their time dependence, their interconnectivity of their time dependence, and that one feeds the other. This phenomena was first mathematically, theoretically sort of put into a format, a proper format by Maxwell, and those 4 equations are called the Maxwell's equations, which are the basic tenets of electrodynamics. Okay, so question was that are the laws of electrodynamics invariant under Galilean transformation? So anyway, we will be answering that question, or try to find out the answer in the latter part. But however, so in the electrodynamics, so what is it that it's basically what is propagating? It's a propagation of electromagnetic waves or light. So it is basically the physics of lights. Okay. Now, Maxwell, while he had sort of put the dynamics in the electromagnetic world in the forms of equations, there was one constant, which is this 1 by square root of epsilon naught mu naught, where epsilon naught is the electrical permittivity and mu naught is the magnetic permeability, okay, of vacuum, of free space, where there is no medium. And without this, the equations would be incomplete. And Maxwell showed that this is the speed of the light. So 1 over square root of epsilon naught mu naught is basically the speed of the light in free space, in vacuum. Okay. So the point is, by that time, independent of this relativity thing, people start to question this. Because when you are talking about a wave, your light, you are saying that it is propagation of electromagnetic wave. What is electromagnetic wave? It is basically mutually perpendicular electric and magnetic fields, okay, moving through. Now, you have a wave, and you are saying that the wave moves in free space with a speed equal to c, which is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. How can that be? How can a wave move without a medium of propagation? Because by that time, the only waves known to physics were the mechanical waves, which are propagating in solids, liquid, gases. Those are basically the disturbance and movement of the microscopic particles. A prominent example is the sound wave. You see, sound wave in air moves with 330 meter per second, okay, somewhat less than the velocity of the molecular motion, but that's what it is. So people already know that what are the properties of the mechanical propagation of mechanical waves. You have sound waves, waves on water, etc. Those are the examples of mechanical waves. Those are basically microscopic particles waves. They need a medium of propagation. Their velocity changes depending upon the medium of propagation. And speed of propagation is a property of the medium and not the source or the detector. Okay, the detector moving with respect to medium will see the wave propagating in different speeds, but things will remain unchanged if the source itself is moving. So these are very well-known facts, well-established facts. But then Maxwell is saying that the velocity of light is a constant, and it's in the free space. It doesn't need any medium to propagate. So that is very counterintuitive. This raised a lot of eyebrows at that time, 19th century, end of 19th century, or the second half of the 19th century. All right. So the questions were asked in the following way, or the logical build-up to resolve this, and blending in with the Newtonian relativity was done in this way. So question is, in which medium speed of light is c? By that time, people had this idea that there is a medium throughout the entire universe which is invisible, which has no viscosity. It's a non-elastic kind of medium, but which is omnipresent. And people associated that it's called ether. Okay, so they used to call it an ether medium. All right. So question was that the speed of light to be c that Maxwell had derived, and you know the equations, electrodynamics equations were turned out to be correct through experiments. Therefore, you cannot really throw them away. You cannot outrightly reject Maxwell's proposition, but there have to be a medium, and that must be ether medium. Okay. Then the next question was, is the speed of light a property of medium, or is it source dependent? Now, then came the question of whether it fits into the Newtonian relativity. Because according to the Newtonian relativity or the Galilean relativity, the velocity of light should be different in different inertial frames, right? But then if that is so, then electromagnetic effects should be different for different inertial frames also. Okay. Or one can think of, but the thing is that if electromagnetic effects would be inertial frame dependent, they would not be universal. Then the Maxwell's build-up completely breaks down, but it has been already established experimentally. Therefore, that is also seems like a remote possibility. Then it was thought of, then there must exist a unique inertial system, because you want both the Galilean relativity and the Maxwell's theory to be correct. Okay, so if both of them are to be correct, then there has to exist a unique inertial system where the speed of light is c. That means in this frame, the so-called ether with respect to which everybody is moving, the ether must be at rest. The velocity of ether in this frame must be 0. That means we have a way of identifying an absolute rest frame, because everything else, as I said, the concept of ether was coined this way, that ether is everywhere in the universe, and all our motions that we talk about are with respect to the ether medium. Now, if the ether is at rest, that is the velocity of ether is 0, then we have a perfectly rest frame, absolute rest frame, one which does not move. I can identify and I can give a statement. This is the absolute rest frame. And if we can discover that, that means we can determine the velocity of a moving inertial frame with respect to the absolute one by carrying out optical experiments there. Okay. Now, this contradicts the principle of Newtonian relativity, because Newtonian relativity already established that all inertial frames are equivalent. Okay. So, therefore, the previous proposition is completely antagonizing the Newtonian relativity. So what is to be done? What are the possibilities? I mean, what I said in this slide, do you understand, or there is some confusion? You have to listen to me very carefully.
Sir, why was it believed that ether must be at rest?
No, it was not believed. Nobody thought that ether is at rest. Ether is everywhere, and all the descriptions that we give is with respect to ether. So ether is not at rest. Just a second. Yeah, ether is not at rest. But how do you fit the fact that the velocity of light is c and it's a constant, right? Maxwell's equations of motions for electromagnetic field established that c is a constant. And what is c? C is the velocity of light. That is the velocity of the electromagnetic wave. Now people are saying that, okay, forget about everything else. Okay, Maxwell, we believe you that unlike the mechanical waves, your C does not require a medium, but at least there is ether. Okay. Now, because you cannot, shake off ether. So now you are saying that your speed of light is c, and it's a constant. This is only possible if there is a unique inertial frame in which the velocity of ether is 0. Do you get my point?
Yes, sir, got it.
Right. So that is the only way we can understand this constancy of the velocity of a wave, light wave, and that it does not require any medium to propagate. But now that contradicts the principle of Newtonian relativity. If you are saying that there is a unique inertial system, then this proposition that all inertial systems are identical, you cannot choose one over the other, that breaks down. Okay. So people were back to square one. They again got back to where they started from. Now there were three possibilities. What actually is happening is that first possibility is a relativity principle exists for mechanics, but not for electrodynamics. That means this Galilean relativity or Newtonian relativity, the concept of equivalence of all inertial frames, that is fine with mechanics, but it does not work for electrodynamics. And when that works, then there is absolutely no problem that there is a ether frame and we can experimentally find it. Okay. The second possibility is a relativity principle exists for both mechanics and electrodynamics. That is, the Galilean relativity can fit both Newtonian mechanics and Maxwell's electrodynamics. But somehow Maxwell's equations are wrong. Maxwell must have made a mistake. But then the question was, then why the experimentalists couldn't identify that? Maxwell's equations were accepted after the experiments confirmed it. So why didn't the experiment, why could the experiments come out to be absolutely correct? There was no problem in it. Third possibility, then people thought that a relativity principle exists for both mechanics and electrodynamics, but Newton's laws of mechanics are not correct. That means Galilean transformation laws are not correct. Okay. Now, at that time, this third probability was simply, out of the equation, because Newtonian mechanics is already pretty well established. Then how can Newton's laws of mechanics are not correct, or Galilean transformation laws, which are just derived out of Newton's laws of mechanics, how can they not be correct? The second one also, the experiments have already suggested that Maxwell's equations are correct. So it would be a long shot to figure out that Maxwell's equations are wrong. So therefore, the usual suspect was this possibility that yes, a relativity principle exists for mechanics, but not for electrodynamics. But then you have to establish the existence of this ether. So far, it has been only in the imagination. You are trying to sort of connect the dots by coining that there is a ether frame somewhere, which is omnipresent everywhere, everywhere. And all the descriptions are with respect to the ether frame. Okay. So then what was the experimental motivation? Is that what are you going to do? You measured the speed of light in various inertial frames. Note if there is difference in speed of light in various frames. And if yes, note if there is a single unique frame where the speed is c. If the third point, first of all, you have to first validate the second point, that if there is a difference in speed of light in various frames, then you can go to the third point, and then if you could establish there is a single unique frame where the speed of light is c, then it's done. Then this ether theory would be acceptable. Okay. Now, before we go do this thing, let's first let's do it in a very simple way. So the search for ether winds can be sort of proposed in a very simple experiment. So suppose I have an apparatus. This dotted box that you see, it's an apparatus, some apparatus, which I will be using to find out the ether winds. Okay. Of course, I'm assuming that ether exists. Now, suppose the apparatus over here, it didn't have a motion. Okay. Now, suppose the apparatus is moving through ether with a velocity v. Actually, the apparatus is not moving, the earth is moving with a velocity v. Okay. Because as I said, the ether is everywhere in the universe. Now, what am I going to do? That I am going to send a light from point A to point B and back. And I am going to measure the time taken. The length from A to B is L. All right. Now, speed of light, I start out by assuming that there is a ether, and the speed of light is c only with respect to the ether frame. Okay. So apparatus is moving with respect to ether. Speed of light is c with respect to ether. Everything is fine. Now, if there was no ether wind, if there was no ether, that is, there is no velocity, v equal to 0. I'm not saying there is no ether, there was no ether, but the ether was at rest. Then v would be equal to 0. And what is the time taken for a round trip A to B and B to A? It is 2L by C, right? Okay. Now, what is the velocity of light relative to the apparatus when this v is non-zero? That is this case. Now then, according to the Galilean relativity, the velocity of light with respect to the apparatus or relative to the apparatus would be c minus v when the light is moving from A to B, and c plus v when light is moving from B to A. Is it acceptable?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. So now what I'm interested in? I am interested in, see, suppose if there is this ether, okay, and the earth is moving or my apparatus is moving in that ether, then due to this movement of the ether, the light signal would be delayed, right? Because now the velocity of light has changed, as opposed to a frame where the ether is at rest. That is, as opposed to a frame which is v equal to 0, whose velocity is 0. So there will be delay in the light signal. Okay. All right. So time taken for the light to travel from A to B is L by C minus V, and time taken to travel from B to A is L by C plus V. All right. And the time taken for the light to travel from A to B and B to A when the velocity of the ether wind was 0 is 2L by C. So the difference between these is the time light signal, the delay in the light signal. All right, are you getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Sir, one time more.
Yeah. So see, when there was no ether wind, the ether was at rest. That is v equal to 0. V is the velocity of the ether wind. Okay. My earth or my apparatus is moving through that ether. Okay. So it's like, you know, a aeroplane is traveling through the air. Okay. If the air was completely still, the velocity was 0. The aeroplane is moving from point A to B and comes back to A. Okay. All right. Now, if there is a wind blowing, okay, then the aeroplane has to negotiate with that wind. And
Yes, sir.
and those who have flown in, you know that you, depending upon the tailwind or the direction of the wind speed, for the same distance, the time to cover for onward journey and for the return journey, they vary, right?
Yeah.
Because in one case, you are actually going with the wind, and in another case, you are going against the wind, so you have to negotiate with that. All right. So here, over here, when the ether wind is there, the light has to negotiate with the ether wind and move. So its velocity is c minus v from A to B, and from B to A, it's c plus v, right? So the time taken for A to B is L by C minus V, and time taken for B to A is L by C plus V. So this is the first two terms is the total time taken. Now these are not equal to this 2L by C, that is for one round trip when there was no ether wind. Okay, so this time delay is due to this ether wind. Okay, all right.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
if there was this ether wind really, then this time delay should be recordable, and then we will be able to prove the existence of ether. Okay. Now this calculation that delta t is 2L by C V square by C square, we can, I'm going to quickly show you how that came up. Okay. So can you see this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this delta t is L by C minus V plus L by C plus V minus 2L by C. And simply if you rewrite, it comes out to be 1 by 1 minus V square by C square minus 1. Now I am going to expand it binomially. You know the binomial expansion, right? And I am only keeping terms up to square. I am not keeping the higher order terms. So if I keep only the quadratic term, you would get that 2L by C V square by C square. Okay, that's exactly what I had shown in this slide. All right, so this is acceptable. Okay. Now what happens? Now, if I punch in the actual numbers, what happens? First, for the Earth in orbit, what is the V by C? Because C is already calculated, 3 into 10 to the power 8. Now, Earth's motion, the velocity also we know. The V by C is 10 to the power minus 4. And for a typical lab apparatus, this length is 1 meter. So this delta t, that is the time delay that has been calculated, comes out to be abnormally low a number, which is impossible to detect. 10 to the power minus 17 second. You can imagine how small that is. It's a theoretical calculation, with the best of the clocks with resolutions, you cannot really measure this. So therefore, what was thought of is that this proposition of this ether is, raises a lot of questions, that whether the ether exists or not. Now, people, of course, didn't stop here. Michelson and Morley, two scientists, they actually carried out a very important experiment which actually sealed the fate of this ether theory. And it came out that there is no such thing as ether, and Maxwell was indeed right that the velocity of light is constant in free space. It does not require any medium to propagate, and that, contrary to what was thought of, that the first possibility is the culprit, it was the third possibility, and that led to the proposition of special theory of relativity. So we are going to stop here. What we will do is, in the next class, we will start with the Michelson-Morley experiment, and I will demonstrate, I will establish that this ether theory was completely negated. That was kind of a very depressing moment for a class of scientists, because they pinned their hope on this ether theory, but that opened up the possibility of a new theory, and thus the special theory of relativity came up. Okay, so here goes your lecture. Now,
Sir, can you please re-explain the approximation in the time delay?
oh, the approximation in the time delay. It's simple. It's just the binomial expansion. Can you see it? See, in this term, look at this term. It's 1 by 1 I mean, I'm just rewriting, nothing, I'm not doing anything new. Okay, I'm just rewriting the thing. Okay, so you put together, this is the
Okay,
term.
yes, sir, I understood.
Now, yeah, so that's the thing. That's the only thing I did.
Sir, in last you wrote in for Earth in orbit, V by C is 10 raised to power minus 4.
Yeah.
Sir, so what exactly is the V? Is it the velocity with which the sun is, Earth is revolving around the sun?
Yes, yes, yes. Because the concept was, when people thought that this ether frame or whatever it is fixed to the sun, and the Earth is actually moving through it. So the apparatus we are talking about, its velocity means basically Earth's velocity.
Yes, sir. Sir, also, sir, in case 2, is the velocity of light with respect to apparatus equal to velocity of light with respect to ether?
Sorry?
In case 2 of the experiment,
Yes.
is the velocity of light with respect to apparatus equal to velocity of light with respect to ether?
Velocity of light with respect to apparatus. Yes. So apparatus is moving with respect to ether. So apparatus is moving with respect to ether means the Earth is moving with respect to ether. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Right.
So what is the need of calculating this time delay? What it is depicting here actually?
Okay. The idea was that people were out to prove the existence of ether. See, if there is no ether, then this V, that the apparatus is moving with respect to ether, this V would be 0, and then delta T would be 0, right? Okay, because then the velocity of light wouldn't be affected at all. It will be C. That is what Maxwell had been telling all along. So what they tried to prove was that when there is a, so the apparatus or the Earth is moving with respect to ether, and the velocity is V, so we will get a detectable delta T. So the delay in the light signal, in the traversal of the light signal in this path from A to B and B to A, is because of this ether wind. As I said, that it's like, imagine like an aeroplane is trying to negotiate with the tailwind. Okay. And as a result of that, if there was no wind, the time taken for a round trip, and if there is wind, the time taken for a round trip, these two would be different.
Yes, sir.
So here also, the idea was that due to this ether wind, because all of us are negotiating the ether wind, we are moving with respect to the ether wind, there will be a delay in the light signal to make a complete round from A to B back to A.
Sir, but didn't they consider the ether's velocity to be zero? Then how can ether wind arise?
No. See, ether's velocity is zero. We are not talking about an absolute velocity. This is where the idea of relativity is. We are saying that there is a ether frame in which we are all embedded. I am not considered about, and according to the relativity, Galilean relativity, you cannot talk about the absolute velocity of any frame. Okay, so there is not like ether is the standardized one whose velocities can be measured, and with respect to that, we can give a statement of the velocity of this frame or that frame. All we are saying is that we are moving with a velocity v with respect to ether. That doesn't
Sir,
mean that the ether is at absolute rest.
Sir, I didn't get why you took that ether to be at rest in the previous slide.
I did not take the ether to be at
Yeah,
rest. So wait.
yeah,
What was being thought of? What people
yes,
thought of? First of all, you have to people thought that there is a ether medium. Okay. All right. So when
yes, sir.
you are saying that the speed of light is c in vacuum, people did not believe because it's a wave. Its speed cannot be constant. Okay. So what medium it is passing through? Since he is saying that it is constant, then it must be constant in a ether medium. Okay. The ether medium was hitherto undetected. But then if you say that ether medium, the speed is constant, but then how can that be? Because according to the Galilean relativity, the speed speed will change from medium to medium. That means medium to medium means inertial system to inertial system. Okay. Now, then people thought, then if that is the case, then can we understand this constancy of light and the statement that the velocity of light c, it is in the vacuum, in the free space, is that there must exist a unique inertial system where the speed of light is c. Okay, because otherwise, if you want to put it within the formulation of the Newtonian relativity, the speed of light or speed of anything cannot be constant across all inertial systems. Okay, but Maxwell has been demanding, and experimentally also it comes out that the Maxwell's equations are correct, and Maxwell's equations are correct, and a very important pointer in that is that the constancy of the speed of light. Okay, so now when you are saying that the speed of light is constant, there has to exist a unique inertial system where the speed of light is equal to c, a constant. Okay, now when you are saying a unique inertial system, what do you mean by a unique inertial system? In this inertial system, this unique inertial system where the speed of light is c, must be such that the so-called ether is at rest, because everywhere there is ether wind. In every frame you look around, you try to calculate, if not anything, there is ether wind. So the velocity of light has to alter. Now, if what Maxwell is saying is true and I try to theorize it, I try to put it into my own understanding, then this inertial system in which the speed of light is c and does not change must be such that in that frame the ether is at rest. Okay, and when I say ether is at rest, that means I am identifying an absolute rest frame. which is in contradiction to the principles of Newtonian relativity.
Yes, sir,
Did it-
got it. Yes, sir,
Okay.
got it.
So this is basically the logical build-up of the way scientists were arguing. And so what people set out to do that, okay, first find out the ether medium. This damn ether medium is to be found out first. Okay. After that, you check that, measure the speed of light in various inertial frames. Okay. And then you find the single unique frame where the speed is c. If the speed of c is different in different inertial frames, you find out what is the single unique frame. And then this entire theory that I talked about is this ether at rest in that unique inertial frame. And that is the absolute rest frame is found out. And that means the Newtonian relativity has a problem. Or Newtonian relativity doesn't have a problem, the electrodynamics does not fit into your Newtonian relativity framework. So what people did is first establish that there is a ether wind. And this attempt suffered a jolt because there was no detectable time delay. We theorized considering that there is a ether wind, and therefore there is a signal delay due to that ether wind, but we found out that it is undetectable. So of course, people didn't stop at that. They might, at that point of time, thought, well, this is a number. At 100 years back, people thought that we do not have these instruments, the clocks, to measure things of that accuracy. But hold on, this will come. But afterwards, this Michelson-Morley interferometer experiment sealed the fate of this ether theory. And
Sir, why was this concept of ether introduced? Like, why did they introduce ether?
because people thought that people were actually not quite happy with the idea that there is nothing absolute, everything is relative. Okay. So in the relativity, Newtonian relativity, it is essentially everything is relative. You cannot give any statement in absolute terms. The absolute velocity, absolute rest frame. When we say rest frame, I have to also say with respect to what you are telling it is at rest. Okay. So people didn't like that idea, and people actually thought that there has to be an absolute frame of reference. So this ether idea came out of that kind of thoughts.
Sir, this magnetic force depends on relative velocity of the frame, right? So,
Sorry?
but then how are we saying that the magnetic force
What?
depends on the velocity of the frame, right?
Right. Yes.
Then
And
how are we saying the electromagnetic force is frame independent?
electromagnetic force is frame independent. Well, at the very beginning, when the principle of relativity was established, what would you think? That everything in the physical world would abide by these principles of relativity, right? That was the thought. That is the natural way to think. And so therefore, the laws of electrodynamics, or in the world of electricity and magnetism, also would be valid. They would be independent of the frame. It cannot be different from one frame to another. See, isn't it the natural way to think that my physics, why would be dependent on the observer?
Yeah, sir.
Right. So that is the idea, that it is the fundamental laws. The Newton's equations of motions, for example, those are fundamental laws. It cannot be, the physics cannot be observer dependent. It cannot be frame dependent. Yes, certain quantities like, positions, momentums, etc., can be frame dependent. But the principles like conservation of energy, how can that be observation dependent? Conservation of momentum, that cannot be observer dependent. Because then those would stop to be fundamental laws governing the physical world. Are you getting my point?
Yeah, sir. Yeah.
Sir, why didn't we start thinking in this ether way for Newtonian mechanics? When Newtonian mechanics was starting to get developed, why didn't we think in this ether way?
What was the need? There was no need.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
so I have a question that is not related to the class. Can I ask?
Okay. Yes, sure.
Sir, we know that mass is related to velocity as m equals m naught by under root of 1 minus v square by c square.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, you are jumping the gun, actually. You are jumping several steps. I haven't really gotten to that point.
No, sir, I was just
You just read it somewhere.
curious
Okay.
to ask.
I won't get into that now. Let the subject develop, and then only you will see. Okay.
Okay, sir.
All right. I think, yeah.
Sir, in the ether medium, scientists has considered as absolute stationary frame, and in the wind theory.
No. Nobody considered it an absolute stationary frame. When did I say that? I never said that. What they thought of is that since C is constant as per the electrodynamics, the laws of electrodynamics, how can it be constant? It has to be, every velocity is frame dependent. How can that be frame? No, they assumed that only way it can fit in is that if it is found that there is a frame in which the ether is at rest, the ether velocity is completely rest. That is, if we can find out a frame and call it, okay, this is the absolute rest frame. Everything has to be described in terms of this. This is my super reference frame, which is at absolute rest. Then only you can fit in the constancy of C into this theory.
So, sir, my doubt is that, sir, in the ether wind theory, when we move the apparatus, then ether frame has considered to be moving frame.
No. See, everything that you describe is moving through the ether. All the descriptions that we are giving is moving through the ether. Okay. So this ether wind is there. You have this apparatus. This apparatus is not moving per se or moving because the earth is moving. So once again, I asked you to forget about the apparatus. Think about the flight of an airplane through the air. Okay, the apparatus is floating in the ether wind. Okay, and the light pulse is traveling from one point to another. That's what it is.
So, what is moving?
The apparatus is earth. The earth is moving.
Oh,
Earth is the ether wind. Earth is the ether wind.
So, sir, how we calculated L by C?
2L by C is when we considered that there is no ether wind. Because we wanted to establish, that due to the ether wind, there is a significant time delay for the signal to make one complete round. We wanted to establish that, we wanted to calculate that delta t, measure that delta t, and say that, look, why there is a delta t which is measurable? Because that proves the existence of a ether wind. Had there been no ether wind, there would not have been any delay in the signal.
Got it, sir. Sir, one more
Sir,
thing.
so-
L is the length that is distance from the sun and earth.
No. Not at all. I am not going into sun and earth. It's just 2 points. At one, you are flashing the light, so light travels from point A to B and comes back again to A.
It can be any chamber or
Anything. Yes.
Sir, so we are taking the speed of the ether wind to be v with respect to our reference frame, because that is what the speed of the earth is.
Yeah,
Okay,
because
sir, understood.
because the earth is basically moving through the ether. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But how can we conduct an experiment where there is no ether wind, sir?
We are not conducting. We are not conducting. This is all theory. Come on, the calculations that I showed, it's all calculations, and then I plugged in the numbers.
Okay, sir.
So you said that ether is basically a reference frame which is located at the center of the sun, around which the earth is moving. And so the v which we are giving, in one case we are saying that there is no ether, and in one case we are saying that we are giving a velocity v to the earth. And you said that velocity of earth is velocity of ether. So what it is exactly?
It is exactly velocity of earth with respect to ether. Okay, the velocity. Wait.
So how are we getting ether winds? I mean, if it is if it is a reference frame at the center of Earth, how are we describing ether winds?
Can we please speak in a less excited way? Okay. The point is that once again, what I am saying is that imagine an aeroplane moving through a air. That's it, nothing else. Imagine the aeroplane is moving, negotiating through the air. Here also the same thing.
Yes, sir.
Right? That's what it is. Now, what is the velocity that we are taking? Is basically the velocity of the earth is due to the velocity of the ether. That's all.
Yes, sir. Got it, sir. Now, fine.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, very interesting discussion. I think I have stoked some imagination into you, and that's what the whole idea of this special theory of relativity is. So, I have to close the class today. See, we have covered only very few things, but conceptual things. And next Tuesday, there will be a tutorial on this Galilean relativity itself. All right. So, I will be emailing you probably tonight or latest tomorrow morning. So, and then next week, we will actually show that how from here, by debunking this concept of the ether, the only way of salvation of this complicated situation was through a new theory called the special theory of relativity. Okay, thank you very much, and see you next week.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.